folks, how's it going? Today we're going to talk about GER 10. It's basic communication. GER stands for General Education Requirement, and our institution requires that students demonstrate proficiency in 7 out of the 10 basic GER areas. GER 10 is one of the most important of those 7 areas, and all students are expected to demonstrate proficiency in this area. And in order to do so, they have to demonstrate proficiency in these 5 areas, or they have to meet the targets for these 5 outcomes. Yay! You'll notice that these 5 outcomes are essentially synonymous with the outcomes that are included in our English 101 Course Master Syllabus or Course Outline, however you refer to it. Most of you are teaching these 5 outcomes anyways. Even if you haven't looked at the Course Master Syllabus or the Course Outline, you're still doing it. Though every now and then we find that this one slips through the cracks. This is making sure that your students know how to evaluate an oral presentation according to established criteria, i.e., can your students evaluate a public speech using a rubric? And I'll explain how we do that or account for that shortly here. So for the course that you're teaching and assessing for GER 10, you'll want to refer to the data collection report form that's down here on page 3 of the methodology. Put in your title, put in your CRN, and then you can scroll down and you'll notice that there's a reporting area for each one of the outcomes that are listed in the course syllabus. Okay. And you're just expected to report whether students met or did not meet those outcomes, both numerically and percentage if you could. So the number of students who have met this outcome, and then the number who did not meet, and then the percentage as well. If you don't, or if you have trouble with the percentage breakdown, I recommend percentagecalculator.net, or you can let me do the dirty work as I will be aggregating the data after we're done. So you'll notice that some of these are relatively broad, right? Producing coherent text within common college-level written forms. What exactly does that mean? Well, the outcomes are often developed intentionally to be vague so that we have quite a bit of flexibility in interpretation and quite a bit of flexibility in how we implement teaching these outcomes. For our department specifically, we have a rubric down here that breaks it down a little bit more. You'll notice that producing a college-level text usually deals with adhering to the requirements specified by the instructor. That includes content requirements and formatting requirements like MLA, APA, etc. And then it also deals with clarity of expression and few errors in clarity and grammar. Now, some of you are probably thinking those are lower order concerns, and you're definitely right. The higher order concerns are taken care of by some of these other categories in the rubric, which correspond with the outcomes that were listed at the top of the methodology, right? These 5 up here, right here. Okay? So at this point, you've got 2 options to report out for each one of these outcomes. Option 1 is probably the easier of the 2, and that is just to retool this rubric as a grading rubric, and that's what I used to do. I used to just allocate point values to each of these areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'd use the top 3 for the first draft of a research paper, these 3 right here. So 4, 4, and 4, 12, and then I'd have the revision for the second draft, 16 points in total for the paper, 12 for the first draft, and then an additional 4 for the second draft. I miscounted in the last take that I did, and I had to re-record for that. So I'm like over here counting in my head as I'm going through this. That's how unfortunate or how terrible my math skills are. Let's not try to paraphrase it, right? So that's option number 1. all you're doing is just retooling this rubric and using it as your grading rubric. There was a time in assessment practice or assessment theory, if we can even call it assessment theory, where people believed that grading and assessment had to necessarily be separate endeavors, and it was a very time-consuming process, and it was really problematic. People are beginning to realize that assessment and grading can be consolidated, and that's why I'm recommending that you just retool this as a grading instrument. It's an assessment instrument, but it can also be used as a grading instrument. Now, there is an alternative option, and that is, of course, it harkens back to the old days of assessment where you grade first and then you assess second. So you're going through the papers and you're assessing utilizing this rubric. I guess another option that I would recommend, which will be simpler than that second option I just provided, would be to take a look at your grading rubric and just ask yourself, which criterion in my grading rubric corresponds with each of these areas, or which most closely corresponds with the individual criterion in the assessment rubric. So let's say hypothetically that you have in your grading rubric a separate area for research and a separate one for argument. So you would take the aggregate of those two scores and you would determine if a student is demonstrating no proficiency, some proficiency, proficiency, or high proficiency. Now I know basically what I'm telling you to do is you're translating your grading rubric over to this assessment rubric, and yes, you're doing estimated guesses in this circumstance, right? There is so much room for interpretation built into the methodology, how vague the outcomes are, right? That comes straight from SUNY, how vague the criterion are in the individual rubrics or the individual areas, that I feel like, yes, we're looking for quantified data, but at the same time, we're relying on faculty autonomy and faculty judgment, right? That's what assessment's all about. It's trying to find a balance between quantification and faculty autonomy and faculty judgment. And this methodology does a fairly good job of that for what it's worth. Okay? If anything, it I think veers on the side of allowing more faculty autonomy. So there you have it. You'll go down through with the other areas, and you're going to do the same thing there. You know, how did your students research a topic, develop an argument, and organize supporting details? How did they perform in that area on your grading rubrics? Or if you retool the rubric below, the assessment rubric as a grading rubric, that's fine too. Give us the number of students who met and the percentage of students that met, or you can just provide us with the number and I'll do the percentage calculations myself based upon the total enrollment in the course. Remember that students who do not turn in the assignment are not students who did not meet the outcome. They're just non-respondents. So leave those out. I'll be able to tally those up myself. Now, of course, we've got this one problematic outcome. We want students to be able to evaluate an oral presentation according to established criteria. There's an activity that we have faculty members do to account for this, and any student that completes the activity, we just say that they met the target for the time being. Is it a perfect approach? Definitely not. Does it suffice for the time being? Sure. And I've already explained part of the reason why I believe that suffices earlier in the video. Anyway, let's get right down to the actual activity. I'll provide you all with a link to a video. It is a public presentation. It's a flawed public presentation. And typically what we do is we have students watch the presentation and then they fill out this oral presentation rubric or public speaking rubric. And then if time permits, they have a discussion about their judgment of the student's proficiency in the video. Did the student do well? Which areas did they excel in? Which areas did they struggle in? Yada, yada, yada. And then we just come up here and every student that did the activity, like I said, they're marked down as having met this criterion. Okay. For the sake of keeping things simple as they possibly can be, I think that's really all we need to cover for the time being. We've talked about the outcomes, we've talked about the report form, we've talked about different ways that you can account for student proficiency, either using the rubric provided in the methodology, doing estimated guessing when comparing your own grading rubric to the evaluative or the assessment rubric. Or doing the process twofold, looking at each paper to grade it and then looking at each paper to assess it. I strongly recommend you don't do that last option. It's way too time consuming. Okay. Also, this semester specifically, I'll probably use this video in the future, but for this semester particularly that I'm developing this video for, we're in the midst of a pandemic and the results aren't going to be great. It's okay if we struggle a little bit through this, or if maybe we missed one of these areas, or students are having a particularly difficult time in one of these areas. That's okay. It's valuable data. It's what we're looking for. Remember, assessment is to help us become better educators, not to be penalized for any issues that we may encounter in the classrooms. And finally, in the aggregate report that I provide, your names will not be identified. The data of the individual report form stays with me, the GER coordinator for GER 10. And if you ever have to do assessment for any of the other areas, the GER areas, the reporting either stays with the coordinator for that GER, or it will trickle up to me, but it really usually doesn't pass past me. And I take faculty anonymity very seriously when it comes to assessment data. That's all, folks. You have any questions?